Hello everyone and welcome to Trade Talk episode 5. It is Gather Round, which is why I'm sitting in this chair. The big man Carl is over in Adelaide for Gather Round. He'll be taking in 4 or 5 games of footy. We'll reflect on the Easter weekend, started on Thursday night and finished with a bit of a lightning interruption on Easter Monday in the Geelong Hawthorn game. So it had a little bit of everything and the picture a little bit clearer, but in some parts a little bit murkier as well as we head towards this weekend. Tom Happel, regular host of this program last year, is with us again. And Tom, it was a big weekend. Obviously there's one game I'm not too keen to talk about, but we will bring it up at some stage.
Yes, well, thanks again, Daz, for having me back. Carl obviously offered Gather Round, so look, great to be back. The round just gone. I mean, we talk about St Kilda, your mob, but also North Melbourne, my mob. Both very disappointing, but not sure we learnt too much down the bottom end of the table with West Coast, Hawthorn and North continuing to be the cellar dwellers, I suppose. Be a long year for those 3 clubs, but at the top end, Essendon go 2-1. Sydney drop a game they should have won, and the D's, despite off-season turmoil, proving to be a very strong unit again. So, certainly looking forward to another big week of Gather Round.
Yeah, Demons 3-1, and their only loss, they were competitive for 3 quarters against Sydney, got overrun late in that opening round, so that loss doesn't look too bad at the SCG. So they're really building nicely. They've got Adelaide in a tricky Thursday night game. The Crows are clearly capable of more than they've delivered, so that'll be another little challenge for them. Back-to-back South Australian games for the D's, and they play Brisbane next week, who are still hunting their first win of the season. But we'll touch on Melbourne shortly. But yeah, it was a curious round. On Thursday night, we saw the Pies finally hit their straps. They looked pretty good through that game, very well organised, and hate using the term sort of DNA in sport, but it looked like they got a little bit of that back in their clash with Brisbane.
I think so, Daz, but by the same token, it's great that they're off the mark, but I think both of these teams are a fair way off, it's fair to say, where they were in 2023, and still their form still leaves a bit to be desired, I think, to be competitive in September. Charlie Cameron, it's just 3 goals in 3 games to kick off 2024, and the Lions need a lot more out of him. In terms of the game at large, the Lions, well, they won uncontested ball by 34. They just couldn't make it count on the scoreboard, and the damage was done in the first quarter with the Pies leading by 4 goals, and there or thereabouts they held that margin for the rest of the game, and that was telling in the end. But for the Pies, I think De Goey and Schultz, a lot's been spoken about, particularly De Goey, rating way down on where he was last season. And Schultz, the Pies did give up a first-round pick for him, as we know, so they'll want more out of him. I think the Pies, despite getting on the board, there's work to be done.
Yeah, Bobby Hill looks in really good form, carrying on from his outstanding grand final. So he's been carrying a lot of the small forward responsibility. Brody Majacek hadn't kicked a goal since the opening round. He found some form in the game as well. I guess the concerning part for Brisbane, so last year they were 13-0 at the Gabba, and they went 5-7 outside of Brisbane. So losing 2 Queensland games to start the season to Carlton and Collingwood, 2 likely finals rivals, certainly likely finalists, it then puts pressure on them on the road. They've lost to Freo in Perth, which is a game they also won last year, so they've now dropped 3 games that they did win the corresponding fixtures last year. So they are very much behind the 8 ball, Brisbane, and really their ability to recover this season is going to hinge on their ability to win on the road.
I think so, Daz, but I suppose the positive for them is North Melbourne in Gather Round this week, so I think it's fair to say they will get off the mark, barring a completely catastrophic loss. But a bit of turmoil at Brisbane at the moment in the media for the wrong reasons, as a few clubs have been actually in the off-season and the start of 2024. But can they galvanise and respond? I think, that 0-3, not great, but I back them in to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends which way you want to look at their form. I mean, they've lost to Carlton, who were a preliminary finalist last year and are unbeaten, and they were 8 goals up in that game. They lost to Collingwood, who were the reigning premiers. They played poorly in Perth against Fremantle. They weren't great that day, but I mean, the sides playing them have sort of been up and running or very well credentialed. So we'll see how Brisbane fare this week. And yeah, a lot of those headlines make news when the side is struggling. I mean, if they were 2-1, that might get swept aside easier than perhaps it does. But as you say, we've seen a bit of that with some clubs. Port Adelaide and Melbourne on the Saturday night felt like a 50-50 game coming in. I thought there was value in Melbourne. They were about $2.80 in that game. And they covered the line in 7 of their last 8 away games interstate, Melbourne. And the line was about 11 or 12 points, which I thought was good value. They were able to do that and win the game. Port led by 3 goals early, then led by 16 points just before three-quarter time. So Melbourne did well to hit back a couple of times. And as we said off the top, they're building a pretty good base of form.
Well, Port dominated all the key stats, Daz. So disposals and uncontested ball by 21, clearances by 15. But it's fair to say the eye test was always in the favour of the D's on the night. I think they looked fitter than Port. And this told in the final term with a 5-goal final quarter to the D's being the difference in the end. And just a quick one, Daz. Alex Neil-Bullen. He's only really, it seems, been spoken about this week post his game, but 2 goals, 24 touches, 6 tackles. He's a real leader down there at Melbourne and highly valued. And I think as we mentioned, after a tumultuous off-season, the D's, they look an impressive unit and certainly doesn't seem to have affected them. Big Max as well, 50 hit-outs. He's back, the big boy, and one for the Supercoach players out there.
Well, Alex Neil-Bullen's only missed 1 game since the start of 2021. Look, and I think people quite rightly have looked at Melbourne in recent years and thought they have the best top-end star power with Gawn and Petrarca and Oliver, obviously Brayshaw up until this year, and Lever and May in defence, and even Christian Salem and those types, Viney. But it is some of those other foot soldier type players. I mean, Bailey Fritsch has elevated himself. Alex Neil-Bullen, he's averaging probably 17, 18 possessions and a goal a game or thereabouts over the last few years. So extremely important part of their lineup, gets a lot of contested possessions. And yeah, he's, one of those unsung heroes within the lineup. And interestingly, if you look at these two sides in the AFL Premiership predictor or ladder predictor that is put together each week that you can catch on the hub. So Melbourne, they're $8 on the exchange. They're rated at 7 by the model, whereas Port Adelaide, $12.50 on the exchange, rated at nearly 16s in the model. So the model's a little bit off Port and has Melbourne at unders, which admittedly they did for most of last year, and obviously it didn't work out quite that way for Melbourne, but very highly regarded on their start of the season.
Another one for the D's fans, Daz, is Trent Rivers. I think relatively high pick 3 or 4 seasons ago, may have been a late first round selection, I believe, but hitting his straps now, key pillar off the half back line, great user of the footy, racks up disposals and sort of drives their offense from the half back line. So there's certainly some good signs there.
So jury out on Port. I know they won 11 or 12 in a row last year, but back into the year beaten by Carlton, beaten by Collingwood, beaten by Brisbane, now beaten by Melbourne early to start this year. I think most people acknowledge that they're pretty good, but are they a contender or are they a finals team?
Well, you spoke about Melbourne's guns being sensational. Port's guns are across the board, pretty much every game, reliable or good for 25 and a goal a game. So I speak of Connor Rozee, Zach Butters, and Boak. Usually, obviously, he's probably in his final season, but those 3 and Horn Francis as well, who's obviously been out last week. But those 4, you can always rely on them to sort of dominate through the midfield. It's their lesser lights, I suppose, and their back line continues to be a concern for me. So, yeah, just be interested to get your thoughts on Zerk Thatcher and Ratugolea. I know Ratugolea, watching that game on the weekend, was cramping up and, he's sort of falling over in the last quarter. I know, he played well for a half and a bit, but yeah, just in that sort of key, I suppose, crunch time, is he the man you want to be relying on? And Zerk Thatcher, as we know, when he was at Essendon, he had bags of goals kicked on him by the big gorilla forwards. So yeah, if they can stand up, I think Port will be okay. But if they can't, it'll be tough.
Yeah, that was the key for them, was building their defence and building their ruck stocks. They brought Soldo in, and then they brought in these defenders as well to try to help that. Jury's out again on whether they've been able to do that. Ratugolea, very good intercept marker, has good presence, but yeah, just building that tank to be able to run out games. We saw a bit of it, got injured a couple of times with Geelong last year as well. So they are a fascinating watch, and then obviously at the other end, whether Dixon and Todd Marshall is a good player, Finlayson, they've got a bit of firepower. Ollie Wines in the middle has shown a few signs in the early part of this year. Last year he was okay, but obviously not as good as his Brownlow best and his performance over the previous 2 seasons. First 3 rounds of the year, his numbers have been okay, so we'll see how he fares.
It'll be that key question as we head, I suppose, further into the season. But Ken Hinkley, we talk about this every year and sort of feel sorry for him in many respects. But if Port continue this up and down, win one, lose one, win one, lose one, the questions will only intensify for him, and the contract extension that he received will no doubt be scrutinised again. But we'll move on to Essendon. Daz, or Essendon and the Saints. I'm sort of reluctant to bring this one up, but we have to talk about it.
I do a weekly Saints podcast. I have cleansed the soul a little bit already this week. I wrote one word on the rundown, which I can't broadcast for it. But look, St Kilda, there's no question they butchered a lot of opportunities early in the game. They should have been comfortably ahead at half-time, maybe 4, 5, 6 goals. Didn't take their chances. Credit to Essendon, they just kept persisting, they kept answering, they kept finding goals when they needed to, and they were clearly on top in the last quarter. They were running right over the top of the Saints. They kicked 2 goals, 7 or something in the last quarter, or 2-6, so they could have ended up maybe kicking away and winning by 15 points or something like that. But, Jake Stringer lands the clutch goal late in the piece from the boundary, which is, part of his star power. It's why he's nicknamed the package. He can do most things in a game, and look, St Kilda didn't put it to bed. Essendon were able to build momentum, hung in there long enough and took their chances. So, look, credit goes to them. I think it's one of those instances where 2 things can be true at once. St Kilda, no doubt, slaughtered opportunities to win the game, but Essendon were good enough to capitalise.
I think, you mentioned earlier on, Daz, about the Bombers' inaccurate kicking. 2-6 they kicked in the final quarter to the Saints, 1-1. Question from me, so a lot's been spoken about the Saints' aerobic capacity and being elite at sort of working over their opponents late in games. I think that's sort of been the hallmark of Ross Lyon coach teams, certainly recently. But is that a bit of a concern that in the last quarter they were so outplayed and dominated by the Bombers? And I suppose injuries may have told, but just a word from you on that.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, injuries probably more before the game. They had a few kids playing and things like that. But Essendon, I think St Kilda had momentum for large parts of the game. Essendon got it, the crowd up. They were, a lot of their key. I think what did happen was Rowan Marshall, who'd been very good, was tiring a bit in the middle. The Bombers' clearance players were getting on top. They were getting first hands on it, and then you can control the game from there. So it felt a bit that way. I mean, St Kilda looked like they were jogging up on the spot, but I think it was Essendon getting first hands on it more than most things.
The additions of Ben Mackay and Goldstein, you just mentioned Marshall getting worked over. Goldstein and Sam Draper in tandem there, working over the opposition's number 1 ruckman. That is something that they would have circled on the whiteboard in pre-season as a sort of an outlet for them, and I think that's working really well for them. And Ben Mackay as well, just down at North Melbourne, he had a nickname, Buckets Mackay, known for his marking, and he's certainly brought that to Essendon, so credit to them so far.
And Brad Scott's obviously worked with Goldstein for a long period of time historically. We look at Gather Round, obviously it's in South Australia, so a couple of home games there. There are some random matches, Mount Barker and Norwood and places like that. It is a very good concept. I enjoyed it a lot last year, and I'm glad that they have brought it back. Adelaide, Melbourne, is it Adelaide's last chance? So if they go 0-4, is it line through them?
I think pen them if they go 0-4. I've actually penned them already. I think 0-3 is enough to say that Adelaide probably won't make the 8 this year. Scoring woes for Adelaide, Daz. So 54, 77 and 34 points to start the year. That's their first 3 games, and that's not going to win you many, if any, games of elite AFL football. So I think Melbourne currently $1.70 on the exchange as things stand for this clash. I think that represents a bit of value actually in the head-to-head market. But yeah, I don't know what you make of Adelaide.
Yeah, well, Adelaide, their strength was perceived to be their firepower, and last year that was the case. So it's obvious where they're falling down. Their strength is not firing, and obviously they're getting beaten around the middle a bit as well. So yeah, hasn't been the easiest, start to the draw with a couple of big interstate games and stuff like that. But in saying that, they just haven't looked like it. I think they kicked a few early against Freo, and they didn't look like scoring after that. So yeah, I think Melbourne humming along at the moment. It's the Crows on their start of gather round last year thumped Carlton on a Thursday night and kind of announced themselves. So they might look back to that with confidence and think maybe this can be a turning point, but it's probably unlikely given how solid the D's are. Port Adelaide, Essendon is fascinating. I think Port, we know roughly what they'll bring, but might be another indicator as to where Essendon sits.
Yeah, they're playing with great spirit, aren't they, the Dons? I think just unsure if it's sustainable for an entire campaign, but Port have got a great record against the Dons, winning 5 of the last 6, and yeah, it's sort of seems like a bit of a defining moment for the Bombers. If they go 3-1, that sets them up beautifully, and yeah, conversely for the Power, if they're to lose this one, then as we mentioned, the critics will be out. But quick one from me, much maligned number 1 pick, Andy McGrath. Shout out to him, playing career best footy, averaging 30 touches a game and setting the Dons up really well off the half-back line, providing leadership and some toughness there. So often criticised for being a bit of a, at times, vanilla number 1 pick. He's living up to it, certainly this season. And as we mentioned, Port have conceded 90 points in their last 2 games. Zerk Thatcher and Ratugolea, as we mentioned, just that combination. Jury's still out.
Yeah, it is for sure. And yeah, I think that's a good shout on McGrath. Terrific on the weekend and moving really well. Fremantle Carlton is a fascinating game on neutral territory. Both sides 3-0. I think the expectation is that Carlton are a potential top 4 side. People probably looking at Fremantle thinking, can they return to the 8 like they did in 2022? I think we'll again get a bit of a clearer picture of both of these sides. How you're reading that game?
Yeah, Carlton have won 3 of their last 4 against Freo, Daz. So I think certainly that'll fill them with some confidence. Watched the Blues closely on Good Friday, and they were really impressive against, albeit a North Melbourne defence who were undermanned and undersized. Curnow and Harry, Big Harry, those two can trouble any defences in the league. So Freo, they've been impressive, no doubt as well, but I'd probably say the Blues have more upside in many respects and could probably, I suppose, if the two were at their best, I'd probably take the Blues to win. Yeah.
I think that's right, the star power within that lineup as well. Bulldogs Geelong is another intriguing game, the last one that we'll look at out of Gather Round. The Cats 3-0 as well, beating Adelaide away. They won the Easter Monday clash just gone against Hawthorn, weathered the storm. Hawthorn kicked 5 or 6 in a row through the second quarter against them. And the Dogs 2-1, big wins at Ballarat against Gold Coast, a game they probably expected to win, and then they thumped West Coast, who were very disappointing, but I think the Dogs were going to make sure they didn't surrender that game as they did late last year. Who comes out on top in this Dogs Cats?
Just a word on Geelong. I mean, will they ever have a sustained period down the bottom of the ladder?
It's an amazing credit.
I don't know what secret herbs and spices are down at the Cattery, but every year they front up. Obviously missed the finals last year, but even then they were competitive for the majority of the season. So 3-0 for them, bringing the stoutness in defence. I think they're a formidable opponent again this season. But for me, this is the most even matchup of the round. I think this will be a cracking game. The both teams at their best stack up with the sort of top rung of teams in the comp, and I think the one edge maybe for the Dogs will be their tall forwards could cause the Cats some issues, but again a sort of toss of the coin here. It's hard to confidently select a team here. Yeah.
Yeah, the Dogs' firepower wasn't always a strength. Going back when they were a premiership contender, 2008, 9, 10-ish, it was probably that lack of height that held them back. But very different prospect this time around. We turn our attention to the Brownlow predictor. I guess the big movers as we look at it were Patrick Cripps, who could get a 3-vote game on Good Friday if Big Harry doesn't pinch them off him. Marcus Bontempelli, potential votes.
Big Harry, sorry to interrupt, I think Big Harry's a shoe-in for the 3 there. He's dominant. But...
Yeah, he was terrific. You look at some of the others around the market. We mentioned Bontempelli, a chance for votes. Max Gawn, a chance for votes. Isaac Heaney, a little bit down in a Sydney loss, but has obviously been polling well prior to that. And then, a lot of the other contenders didn't play necessarily, like Tom Green, who had the bye with the Giants, who was the new favourite. But some of the others, Lachie Neale, last year's winner, and Nick Dacos, last year's favourite, both predicted to be in the frame for votes last time out. So overall, Green still the favourite, marginally ahead of Isaac Heaney. Nick Dacos at 12s, Caleb Sarong also around about that mark. Patrick Cripps, 21s into 19s on the back of that. Where do you see potential value in the Brownlow market?
Well, in our next segment, Daz, buy, hold and sell. I'm buying Isaac Heaney. I think 860 currently is on the Betfair exchange in the Brownlow market. And our predictor, as you mentioned, has him not polling against Richmond, but 27 and 2 goals. I think he'll snatch 1, maybe 2 votes there. And I have him sitting on 9 votes after 4 rounds, and he's playing obviously the football of his career. West Coast to come this week. I think it's a massive opportunity for him to almost create a bit of a buffer and, as we said, playing more midfield minutes, and 860 at the moment. I think it's something to lock in.
Yeah, and Tom Green plays the Gold Coast, so you got Tom Green and Matt Rowell, who are both in the top 6, playing against each other potentially. And Sydney have made it clear with Isaac Heaney that even when the likes of Mills and these guys come back, he's still going to get a lot more midfield time, which has been what he's done over the start of the year. I still like Cripps and even Heaney's teammate Errol Goulden at a pretty solid price. And Clayton Oliver, as much as he hasn't absolutely dominated the start of the year, he looks in good enough form to be better than the 26s that
he's
you
been
find
getting
him.
a lot of ball, hasn't he? That's never been a problem, but certainly he hasn't taken long to, I suppose, reacclimate himself into the game. He's averaging more than 25 touches a game, and that always, I suppose, the umpires always notice that, don't they? So.
They do. Buy, hold and sell. We always enjoy this segment each week. You've just mentioned your buy is in Isaac Heaney. I'm buying a couple of sides who finished top 4 last year, who are a good price to finish top 4 again as it stands now. One of them is Collingwood. Now, they've still got to improve on what they did, but Hawthorn this week, a game they'd be expected to win. They'll probably shorten a little bit. I still think there's enough talent there. I think in the first 3 weeks, some of what was happening was a little bit bizarre, where they were making silly mistakes at various stages of games, but are still loaded with talent. And I think Melbourne, who are about 260 to finish top 4, I still think they're as solid a team in the competition as there is. And
it's a good price, isn't it?
Yeah,
260.
Exactly. So, I mean, if you look at the Giants, there's a good chance to finish top 4. And then the other sides in the mix, clearly Carlton, you'd throw Collingwood, you'd throw Melbourne, you'd throw Sydney, those sorts of sides that are around the mark for top 4. But I think Melbourne, are as good a chance as any of those sides in that frame. Who's your hold?
My hold's Essendon, Daz. I wrote in the pre-season that if Essendon reached 350 in the top 8 market on the exchange in the early rounds of the season, that was a betting opportunity. They're currently 345, so there or thereabouts, that mark on the exchange. But with Port and the Bulldogs to come in the next 2 weeks, that could, I suppose, dramatically shift either way. They could shorten if they win both or one, or they could drift if they lose both. So, should they beat Port this week to move 3-1, keen to pull the trigger there and and have a bet. But just for the moment, I think they're a really interesting watch. So that's my hold. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I'm the same on Freo. I mentioned them last week. I'm holding them again. They beat Adelaide, which was passing the first of those tests. Next 2 weeks, they've got Carlton. Then they play Port Adelaide after that. So a couple of pretty good sides. Freo have done everything right this year. They're answering the challenges. They've responded well. Looks like they've found their rhythm again. But next 2 weeks probably tells us a bit about where they sit in the scheme of it. So just going to sit on Freo. Yeah, similar thing. I think their markets will move either way, regardless of how they get through those two games. Who's your sell?
My sell, it's a generic one, but confusing umpiring is my sell. So Good Friday, they paid 55 free kicks for the game in total, 55. So no game should ever have that amount of free kicks paid. I think the holding the ball rule is the main source of angst for fans at the moment. You know, the ones that were clear as day, the ones where I suppose the crowd in unison shouts ball. You know, those ones aren't paid anymore. You know, I suppose, is it too much to ask for some balance? So I'm not saying put the whistle away, but I'm also not saying pay everything either. I'm just saying a little bit of balance and equilibrium. And I think they've lost a bit of feel for the game, the umps. So that is my sell. Yeah, 55 was remarkable.
It's too many, and you don't want to see games being too stop-start with too many whistles. Now, that doesn't mean as you say, you let everything go, but you can be whistle-happy, and it can halt the momentum of a game. Mine's similar on umpiring. Obviously, Jack Ginnivan's been in the news a little bit. Now, umpires are human, so if you're human, you're prone to some sort of pre-existing prejudice, or it might be, I've seen this player duck their head before, I've seen them lead low and draw free kicks. Maybe they've done that again. They've got to make decisions very quickly, and they might process that for a second and think, oh, the moment's passed, I haven't paid it, let's go. But they just need to umpire in the moment. That there needs to be a way that they ignore who the player is and just call what they see, rather than saying, oh, he's got a reputation of this. It's like, well, what have you seen with your eyes, and pay that. And I know that's a very difficult thing to do, but the game just has to be umpired that way.
I think as well that nowadays with 4 field umpires, I think that's far too many. I think we're getting situations now where 2 umpires will be looking at the same contest, and one umpire will almost half blow his whistle or half signal something, and then the other one will come in over the top and sort of overrule them, and that's not what we want. We want clarity and concise decision making. So yeah, maybe one for the powers that be does to bring it back to maybe 3 field umpires. 3 field umpires, I think would be best.
Yeah, and obviously it does create confusion when you have a non-controlling umpire pay a free kick, you can't pay advantage, and you get little things like that can confuse fans. So yeah, it's always a work in progress. Looking at some of the trading strategies, I think it's a pretty well matched market in terms of, I think they've framed most of the games fairly accurately. One thing that Betfair has offered over recent years is same-game multis. So I am looking at the Thursday night Adelaide-Melbourne clash. There are a couple that stand out there. Generally, they'll deal with things around margins or under-overs, and then a couple of player markets. So there's one that's 760 at the moment, which is the total points under 169.5. So if you work that out, that's roughly 90 to 80, that type of game. I think given Adelaide's scoring woes of recent weeks, Melbourne aren't a ballistic scoring team themselves either, so I think that's a decent chance for unders. Jack Viney, 25 plus disposals, is in great form, and Ben Brown, 2 plus goals, kicked 3 last week playing at the same venue. So I think that one at 760 is reasonable value. And if you wanted something maybe in inverted commas safer, Melbourne 1 to 39 into Oliver 25 plus, Petrarca 25 plus is $4.40. So just a couple of same gamers in the Adelaide-Melbourne game for mine.
I haven't had a look, Daz, but Jordan Dawson's a player who, skipper of the Crows, fantastic 2023 season, and seemed to be sort of building, but he hasn't been great to start this year. I just wonder if gather round, big stage, big crowd at the Adelaide Oval, probably season-defining game for the Crows. I think sort of what there might be an opportunity there to back him in the 25 plus market. I just think he'll bounce back heavily this week.
Well, he's 520 for 25 plus and a goal. That's the little multi that's available on him at the moment, the 520.
Yeah, that's almost worth playing, I think.
Yep.
Back him to bounce back.
It's always tricky when you've got to add in the goals for midfielders, but you never know. He is a noted goal scorer, famously kicked that winner after the siren in the showdown either last year or the year before. So there is a fair bit to like across the weekend. Obviously, it starts on Thursday. We've got a couple of Friday matches. What about, just as a final thought, North Melbourne, given the form of Brisbane, I know Brisbane are a very potent side. When they get on a run, they can score, but the points handicap is 36.5. Can North cover the line?
Daz, to be honest with you, I think North Melbourne, in any betting strategy at the moment, I wouldn't be, apart from laying them, I wouldn't be betting them, to be honest. They're just too unreliable, and you know, as we saw against Freo in the second round, up by 6 goals, you know, cruising, making mincemeat of Freo, then 8 goals or 9 goals unanswered. So I just think young team, probably not a betting proposition at the moment, but the 5-10 on a Friday, that fixture, a lot of North fans complain about, you know, the Sunday 440s and whatnot, but I think in this current climate, the way they're playing, the 5-10 on the Friday is the right slot for them.
The other side note on that, as a final thought, I am laying that time slot in the sense that daylight savings doesn't end until Sunday, which means that 5-10 is 4-10 in Queensland. So Brisbane are playing at 4:10 on a workday. So if you're a Queenslander, you know, wanting to go home from work and watch the footy, your side plays at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. It's not ideal.
Knock off for a quick 4x, does?
Yeah, they might head to the pub a fraction early on the Friday for that one, but don't know if that was the most forward planning I've seen. But this has been Trade Talk episode 5, building up towards Gather Round. It all starts tomorrow, and we look forward to catching you again next week.
What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.